This is Ray Varner, class of 2010, here at Fairfax, Virginia, with the Oral History Project Living Legacies and the Women of Randolph-Macon Initiative. I'm here with Noreen Joslyn of 76 and with Sarah Hendricks of the Development Office. And I'm going to start with, how did you first hear about Randolph-Macon College?
I had just going to high school in Northern Virginia. I went to Arlington High School, and I had heard of it through my guidance counselor. And I had known of at least one or two people who'd gone there. And I also had a boyfriend at the time, and he was going there, but his uncle was also an alumnus from very early in the century, and they had some family involvement, so there were Randolph-Macon stories at their house and so forth.
All right. Can you tell me about your first trip to campus?
Well, quite honestly, my first trip to campus was probably in the role of being a girlfriend, coming down to visit, and I took the Greyhound bus, and it stops at the gas station, which would be down by now what is a much more developed highway exit, and you would get off at the gas station, and it was probably, I don't know, 9:30, 10 o'clock at night in the fall. I was working as a secretary for the Smithsonian full-time, and this would have been after work when I would have gone down there to visit for the weekend. I stayed at a boarding house, which was in town, operated by an elderly couple. And they would come in the morning and wake you up and bring you a lemonade. I remember that. But there were absolutely no boys allowed upstairs in the boarding house. And it wasn't food except for the lemonade. It was just an elderly couple that saw a chance to make a few dollars. It was pretty reasonable. But that was my first visit to campus. First time I came to campus, it was dark. That would have been during the fall to winter of 1971. I returned as a student in the, I guess it would have been 1972, late summer.
So what were your impressions of the college when you were able to see it? I assume you saw it in the daytime that next day.
Yes. Even though I believe that the number of people who were there in that 71 class, it was less than 100 women. I want to say maybe 50. But the thing that would hit me was there just were so many guys. And not like, wow, there's so many guys. It's just weird that there were so many guys. It was not, there were not very many women there at that time. And you didn't see them, not even sometimes working in the dining hall. There were a lot of male workers too. But it wasn't like I came down and stayed over in the dorm room of a female co-ed. Though some guys would do that. They would have their girlfriends stay in the dorm room with the female co-eds.
What did you think about the campus aesthetically?
I thought it was beautiful. And it did have the fountain in the center at the time. Some of the dorms were older and that. There was the women's dorm, I think this was open in 71, which was actually called New Dorm. I'm sure it has a name now, but it was called New Dorm. And when I came as a student, I was in Mary Branch North on the corner. And we had windows on both sides, which was nice, and it was upstairs. It made it airy and close to the bathroom. I thought it was beautiful. I had lived in conditions in high school. We were not well off economically. And I thought this place was like living in a park. Seriously, very nice. It was different. Should I just go on? Mm-hmm. It was different being in the second class than the first class of women. This is normal now as someone who works as a social worker, works with people. There was, though everyone was friendly, the women in the first year kind of hung together. And then, okay, well, you guys are the new women, and there was a little bit of an invisible line. What was different for me was that I had worked full-time as a government secretary, so in fact, I was actually even a little bit older than some of the women of the first class, and had, therefore you would think would have some peers in there, and eventually I did, but there was a little bit of, not resentment, but okay, we have our thing going here, we're established, and here come you new guys. I'm going to guesstimate that there were about 100 women in the second class, which entered in 72. So that's where I was.
Did the fact that the college had recently gone coeducational, did that, I guess it influenced your decision to go there, but was that part of your decision?
No, it really wasn't. Bottom line is that I had applied to several schools when I decided that I really wanted to go to college after I'd started working full-time, and Randolph-Macon gave me the most money. They gave me an award for $3,000, which sounds like lunch money now, but I remember I wrote on my calendar TG, which meant $3,000, thank God. And I knew that at that moment, I literally knew that my life was going to change because I was going to go to college, and I was one of 6, and no one had gone to college, and I was the youngest, and I was like, I'm getting out of Dodge, I'm going to go to college, and my life will be better. And it was one of those moments that you never forget.
Do you remember what scholarship you had? Did you ever know?
It was need-based. I had no money. I had some money saved up from working, but there was no money in the background. So I was to go to, my tuition was paid for. I had a work-study job, and I always worked on campus the whole time. I started out as an assistant in the economics department with Carl Baskin, and that was because Carl Baskin was longtime friends with the woman who'd been my supervisor in the office. I worked in the Office of Elementary and Secondary Education at the Smithsonian. The area where my office was at the Smithsonian is now a gift shop. I've passed it. But Carl Baskin was friends with my supervisor, Joan, so he let me work in his office. And we are talking typewriter with correct tape kind of thing. And I wrote typed letters and things for them. And they were very nice to me. But even if he wanted you to redo something, he would just kind of wrinkle his brow, and then you would say, do you want me to try this again? And he would say yes. So, but there was a student, Sandy, a young woman in the first class, who had worked for Dean Andrews and B.J. Seymour in the Dean of Students office. And when she was leaving her job, I don't remember why, she told me, and that became my work-study job. And I was there, I believe, in my memory, from 15 to 20 hours a week. And that was a great place for me to be. That was a very good job. But the unusual thing also that I recall, of course, in your entry-level classes, of course, there was like freshman English. There'd be, some more girls and guys in the class. But when you moved into upper-level classes in your major, it was not unusual to be the only girl, or the only female, I shouldn't say girl. And that was, taking sociology of marriage and the family in a room full of Southern men and yourself, who I had originally lived in Pennsylvania before I came and went to high school in Arlington, was a little bit of a different experience. And I thought that they were just like so backward. And I remember thinking, thank God I'm not going to marry any of you guys. And they had some very definite non-feminist opinions which would come up in class.
Like what? I mean, in a way that was
Well, I mean, there were things about even, and this is now we're into 72, 73, not everybody, some of them expecting that the women would stay at home and raise the kids, or that they would be more likely to be in clerical or teaching kinds of jobs, that sort of thing. Or we would be talking about in marriage around the world, sociology of marriage and the family. Well, we would be learning about some culture where maybe women were more subservient, and I don't see what's wrong with that kind of comments would come out of the back of the room, So it was, and I've always been a talker my whole life, and my hand was always going up, and I was always refraining from saying, I can't believe you said that, and, kind of thing, and offering my very feminist opinion, and eyes were rolling. So some of that was a combination of the political times, and some of that was, I was completely outnumbered at those moments in that environment. So,
did you feel the teachers, were they supportive?
I was thinking about this recently. Yes, they were. For example, because I needed to religion electives in my brain, I did take a class, one with Dean Andrews and one with Dean Seymour, where I learned historical things about the Bible that I had never even really fully understood. It was like taking history classes. It was fascinating. In some of those environments, in some of my senior level sociology work, it was I felt very much an equal. A story came to mind, which is absolutely true, and I will not name names because I believe that the gentleman is probably deceased. And he was a professor, and I will say, I think in my memory, this was in the English department, and I was one of the few girls, and I think I might have been the only girl in that class. There might have been one other, and we had a research paper, and I had gone to his office late in the afternoon to, everything okay? Yeah, late in the afternoon to ask him a question or two about this paper, which was, of course, due the next day. And overalls were in, and you would have an overall and a T-shirt, sort of a hippie thing. And I had a pair of overalls and a T-shirt, and I remember having them on as I went to talk to him in his office. So what do? You're in college, you're up writing a paper, you get up the next morning, you put on what you took off the night before. And I walked into this morning class wearing overalls and a T-shirt, and he said to all of them, I see that you are wearing the same thing you were wearing when you visited me in my office late last night. And, okay, keep in mind, I'd worked downtown in Washington, D.C. I'm not 18 off the farm, So I looked at him and I said, you mean when I visited you in your office during working hours yesterday afternoon? And all the guys they're snickering away. But this was so blatantly, I felt, a sexual statement. And of course, there had never been any overtures or anything. But this kind of double entendre did occur sometimes, but not from, of course, the most professional people. And I had remembered in class discussions that he would periodically make some side comment about women and women just wanting babies or something. But there was innuendo that I had been with him the evening before in his office for whatever reason and happened to be wearing the same outfit. And I have always been pretty good at giving a caustic look, and I corrected him, and I just went on with the day, and the guys went back to snickering. I mean, that stuff did happen here or there, but it wasn't, to me, it was not worth pursuing. You know, those things happened then. After I got married, and this was in downtown Ashland, if you can picture that, in the 70s, we bought a Ford Pinto. And Pinto? It's either a Pinto or this Gremlin that we had, one or the other. And we were talking to the man about the car, and the salesman in downtown Ashland said, "Little lady, here's a list of colors you can pick from." So this was part of life. It wasn't like just in the classroom because there were men. This was life in not urban America. This was more rural America at that time. So you didn't blow up over everything.
Can you tell us about just your social life? You know, what activities you did. You know, maybe where you worked.
Well, I was a constant babysitter. I pretty much had the math department sewed up in terms of the children of the math department babysitting. And I often biked to these, on my two-wheel bicycle, because Ashland is so safe and so flat that I would go to their homes. And people recommended me to other people, so that was a good way to make money. And then I worked in the dean's office, and I also was the first female president of Omicron Delta Kappa, which is the National Leadership Honor Society, and I remember that very well. And I had some very good female friends. And the young woman that I ended up in my sophomore year, Lisa Claypool, being her roommate, we met on the first day of coming to Randolph-Macon. And we're sitting in the auditorium, and the speaker says, "Look to your left and look to your right. And in 4 years, at least one of you won't be here." And there was no one on my left, and she was on my right, and we graduated together and, remained good friends. But, we did stuff. People would get pizza, and you'd have pizza in your room. You would, campus center things. There were late night raids to vending machines. Sometimes vending machines might have insects in them. It was, we were there before the campus center with its nice little cafe that I've since been in got up and running. You walked to the grocery store. There literally were no major franchises at that exit. Stuff was in Richmond. You wanted to go to McDonald's, you got in a car and drove 15 to 20 miles. There was like a diner out at the exit that had interesting breakfasts and bacon and eggs kind of thing. And the dining hall had steak every Sunday at lunch, and that was a big deal. There was always a line because everybody showed up for that. I was not into the fraternity scene. There were no sororities at that time. I just wasn't. It seemed like a bunch of people getting drunk. And the thing was, I had to stay at Randolph-Macon. If I flunked out of Randolph-Macon, I had literally nowhere to go because of my family situation. There was not, well, I'll go home and come back in a semester. That was my home. The relatives that I had stayed with that before I went to work and so on, they had moved and had gotten a smaller place. There was no room. It was known, you're 18, you're gone. By the way, I was legally emancipated when I was 17, so I was fully responsible for myself. So I had to stay there. So I wasn't going to have anything jeopardize it. And, I was in student government. I remember being a representative from my dorm. Big thing, of course, was visitation, as we called it. It sounds religious now, visitation. But you could not enter a dorm on a weekday morning, I want to say noon, and you were to be out by a certain time, which might have been midnight or 11 p.m. on Sunday night. Violations were numerous, but we didn't tell on each other. We just did. And it wasn't all that people were having sex. Sometimes people were just literally sleeping over or passed out from a party or something, because that happened. And you would run down the hall to the bathroom and make sure nobody was in it so that your, guy visitor could go use the bathroom. And I'm not just reporting on me. I mean, I saw this, that I'd be in the bathroom and they'd call, so-and-so wants to come in and use the bathroom. And what people did was they just stayed in their dorm room with the people of both sexes. And it was, at that time, doors were closed. I had heard that even in the past there used to be rules about how the person had to keep one foot on the floor. Now this, you could sit on the bed, but you had to keep one foot on the floor. This predates coeducation in 71. That was kind of by the wayside then, and that really sounds kind of antique. But then we thought these were dumb, and demonstrations were going on in America. We had seen demonstrations for other things. I myself had seen the March on Washington, having lived in D.C. at that time. So a bunch of people gathering by the fountain to complain and demonstrate about visitation was small potatoes. So, but they really, they, as near as I can remember, they really stuck to that at that time. The dorm mother for Mary Branch, who was a very nice elderly lady, she sort of looked like Aunt Bee from the Andy Williams show with her hair piled up. She was very nice, and she had a TV. Now, we all did not have TVs, so people could go in her living room and you could watch television and sometimes hang out there if you wanted to be away from the dorm room environment. And I was in there once and the phone rang and there was some, demonstrating going on outside, and I was keeping track of that and running in and out of the dorm. I wasn't at that moment leading the fight, and Dean Andrews was on the phone, and he called and he just kind of wanted to know what was going on and was everything okay. I'm assuming he was calling from his house. So they were fully aware of what we were doing, even though we thought we were being covert. And I remember a big nighttime walk to Luther White's house. Now, this is absolutely true, because one of the guy ringleaders told us they'd even checked call ahead. The man wasn't even home. I believe that his children were there and there was a babysitter. These poor girls in the house. And everything was like locked off and looked dark and all that. I think the porch light was on. And we were having a silent candlelight vigil in the street. And he wasn't even there. He was probably at the movies. But I remember walking through a residential neighborhood there, and that was to complain about this, that we thought visitation was unfair.
What would happen if you got caught? I mean,
well, there was an honor court. There was an honor court.
Did people get in trouble for it?
Not specifically. I cannot say that so-and-so was expelled for this. You might be on like a suspension or something. I'm sure that there were specific rules, but I honestly, or consequences, but I cannot remember what they were. Honor court, though, was taken seriously. I sat on a couple of those, and you were like drafted the same way that you are for court today. And a professor had been letting a student do a makeup exam. It was a young woman, and he thought that she had cheated because she was in a private area taking the makeup exam, and you were on your honor, and we found her not guilty, as I remember that quite clearly. But the court ran late on a day that was right before a holiday recess. So we came out, and it was dark and late, and dorms were closing because it took a few hours to go through that. So that was a whole, you would bring someone to represent you. There was like the equivalent of a jury. Who could ask questions. It was a big deal. The sense of honor, it wasn't scoffed at in my memory. Besides, the place was not that big in terms of personalities. You're talking like hundreds of people, not like thousands like it is now. So if somebody got in trouble for something, or somebody was, passed out drunk, everybody pretty much knew. There weren't that many of you. What else did we do? We went to the movies at the movie theater in Ashland. One time when we went to the movies there, we counted, there were literally 17 previews before the movie would start, and then there would be like one movie. But there were not things like coffee shops up in town or whatever. There was a drugstore, there were some businesses. The people in town, I guess they still call them townies. There was a laundromat. We had laundries in the basement. There was a laundromat in town. There was actually two, and if it was too crowded in yours, you could go to the one for the in town. I do remember this clear as a bell, being told by one of the local residents that one laundromat was more for black people than the other laundromat was. And I could have gone there, but it would have been unusual, that sort of thing. There was like, I want to call it an A&P. You'd go over there and get snack foods and stuff and carry it back. I remember buying a pumpkin, carrying it back down the street from the grocery store. So, I married at the end of my sophomore year, and to my boyfriend, who I've been married to now for 37 years. He's still my boyfriend. And I was working for Dean Andrews and B.J. Seymour at the time. Dean Andrews took me in his office and said that there were doors that only one person could go through, that two people could not go through together. Meaning, I would somehow, again, keep in mind, mid-70s as a woman, and I think I understood his perspective, that I would not get as far if I got married. And we're still married, and I politely listened and said I was going to do this, and we got married on Labor Day weekend of 1974. I still have the white blanket that Dean Andrews gave us, and Dorothy Barnes was his secretary, and she gave me a nightgown, which was supposed to be racy, but it wasn't. She was extremely nice to me. It was very nice. I always felt a part of a family at Randolph-Macon. I told Mrs. Barnes when she came back from lunch that her first grandchild had been born. It was a boy. I was with Dean Andrews at the office when he found out that his younger brother had been accidentally killed in an accident. Sitting right there. I was there, I was about 15 or 20 hours a week. Room sign up was always fun. They had a poster board. Think of a poster size board. Drawn on the poster board was the floor plan of the dorm, and you and your roommate had to come in together and sign in pencil, not in ink, that you wanted to be roommates together in that room. And I remember standing at my window holding this thing for what seemed like hours on end while people would deliberate. And that's close to the bathroom, and if we're over there, we'll be next door to, Ashley or Susie, and we don't want to live by her. So there was a whole lot of wheeling and dealing that would go on. Or if people were in trouble and were called in to talk with the dean. I remember that quite well, too. But
So you mentioned your roommates. Can you tell me anything else about your roommates especially freshman year? Where did you live freshman year?
I lived in Mary Branch in freshman year. I'm smiling. Again, I am not naming names. My roommate, who was of the first class, had her system going. I don't know. I really don't. If there were so many of them that the women of the first year all had singles or what. But she wasn't real happy about having a new second year freshman roommate when she was a sophomore. And she said to me, didn't I want to be with people my own age? And then we did the math and we figured out that I was actually older than her. She literally, I'm laughing now, I just have since then, she put a piece of tape down the middle of the room across the rug, and I was not to go over there. And by the way, the appliances were over there, but she owned them. Keep in mind, my back to school shopping with no money was I got some jeans and some school supplies. She had appliances, and I wasn't supposed to use them. But I've always been good at getting along with people. I didn't really do anything wrong. I mean, I was very conservative. It was just like, don't touch my stuff. And that's how it was. I'm thinking, we got a divorce. That's what I always called it. The second year I roomed with the person I met. I told you, Lisa Claypool. We got along famously. We were going to move into the basement of Mary Branch, which is not as bad as it sounds because they painted one of the storage rooms. And we were all, because then we would be like only 6 people in a bathroom as opposed to being up on a floor. And then I decided to get married that summer, and she got mad at me, but we made up. But there was a little bit of, we were here first, from the first year women to the second year women. But after a while, everybody, by a while, I mean 2 years, 3 years, everybody just kind of melded together. There were some of the people from the first year, Doris Ragsdale, Maria Mall, people that went on to become physicians. They were very smart. I related with them. I mean, they were always, nice to me. We had altercations on the floor over people being loud at night. People playing loud music and partying loud at 1 a.m. on a weeknight. And, I, as I said, I'd been a self-supporting adult. I would take you on verbally. There were some verbal disputes, but that's the kind of the stuff, how it went.
All right. How did you decide your major?
That was also a little bit of a personal decision. I'd mentioned that I had lived with family members, other family members in my high school years. I did have, even though I was a very good kid because of the circumstance, I hadn't committed any crimes, I had a social worker assigned to me by the Arlington County, and I thought that she was just, I say this, social workers and guidance counselors changed my life, and I said, I would like to do that. And sociology, we didn't have a bachelor's in social work, we had a bachelor's in sociology, which was a good entry point, and that's how I got there. I did take probably 2 transfer classes in my later 2 years at Virginia Commonwealth and got them transferred in. I took them at night because Randolph-Macon didn't have those courses at that time, which was good because it gave me another perspective. We took social research we did a big social research project in our senior year, which of course is, as you know, this is a social research project that we're doing. You're following specific guidelines. And we had assigned questions that we had a random list of Ashland residents. We had to go and talk to people and go and knock on their doors and stuff, so I did that. But it was attitudes of some of the guys, and these were guys who had entered with me, and it is now spring of 1976, are saying, well, my research project is that I want to discuss sexual habits. And the professor was a very nice man, very tall, I remember. He said, well, okay, well, your structures, and here's who you're going to do this. You're going to have this list of names. And they were like, what? You mean I can't just go up to Mary Wash and walk up to 40 women and ask at random? I'm serious. Her sexual habits. And they'll answer, I'll come back and write a paper. And he was, no, we have a cohort, we have a research control group, we have all this. So this kind of, we're just a bunch of guys and we want to, ask, sex. I mean, that's what guys do at that time, was still going on. But I remember rolling my eyes at it, being quite serious at that point. I did something else, which I'll tell you quickly, is that in March of 1976, I went to work for the Virginia Department of Corrections, and I worked 4 to midnight and completed college. We graduated on Memorial Day weekend. And because I was now a full-time worker, and was taking, I think I had to take 1 less class to do this, I was no longer eligible to work in Dean Andrews' office, which was okay because now I was a full-time state worker with benefits. But I was basically a house mother at the age of 21 for girls who were teenage girls who had committed crimes or status offenses who were incarcerated in Bon Air. And I had to pay a co-ed named Ruth money to sometimes drive me there. It was in Richmond, and then I could be picked up by someone else in the evening. But eventually I was there for 2.5 years, and I went on to do group therapy with teenage female prisoners 6 times a week in the South with no air conditioning, I always point out. On the day of the bicentennial, I was working indoors with no air conditioning, and it was very hot. But that was what became my job. On Memorial Day weekend of 1976, we had George Bush Sr. come as the graduation speaker. And he came because our classmate, Vince Zamaria, notice I remember this, was his paper boy. And Vince wrote Bush Sr. and said, hey, why don't you come and do this? And he had just returned from being ambassador to China. So this was a big deal that he came. And then I got my diploma, and on the way back, I was right in front of Jim Jump, who was one of my, friends and political companions in college, and I had my diploma, and I remember doing this. I was so thrilled.
Who was your advisor when you were? Do you remember?
Well, for a while, it was Professor Jordan, who was a very nice man, but didn't always arrive for things. He was lackadaisical. Sometimes he just didn't even come for class. And I remember getting rather PO'd about that, because I would have, darn it, I did those readings, or I wrote that paper. And I showed up here, and you didn't show up. And I remember being mad about that. There was a female professor came into the sociology department, and I remember what she looked like, and she was petite and had dark hair, but I can't tell you her name. And she was like my advisor in my senior year. I spent a lot of time with Professor Chalice in Spanish. I had taken French in high school, but I realized that Spanish was going to be needed, most likely with the populations that I was thinking I would be with in social work. So I started over and progressed through, I believe, 4 years of Spanish with him. And I even remember we had a oral quiz, and you went into his office and did it individually, and he had his baby daughter with him, and he plunked her on my lap. And I remember speaking Spanish while jiggling my knee and playing little games to keep her amused, which made sense now because it's conversational and you're supposed to be able to do anything while you keep a conversation going. But I was originally born in Pittsburgh, and I believe he was from Pittsburgh originally, and we had a connection there. And I had friends in the faculty that I would go and talk to. I've mentioned the dean several times. B.J. Seymour took me with her to William and Mary, where we gave a talk about coeducation. Before I went to college, I'd given tours in the Smithsonian also, so I was always a pretty good public speaker. But there was an opportunity to do public speaking at Randolph-Macon. I remember doing a welcome to new students in the chapel, and I was one of the people asked as a woman to give a welcome to the students, and I did that, and it went well, and I got some laughs. And I give, along with my job now, I'm in private practice as a mental health therapist for families and kids. I give parent talks. I've been on TV and radio. I think that was the beginning of that, being at a mic in a room in front of a chapel full of people speaking. I think that was a very good beginning for me. What else?
Did you ever take classes with Dean Andrews or Dean Seymour?
I took one semester each of the religion.
Sorry, you mentioned that.
I did. I spent a lot of time. I also took some, economics, Spanish. There were a lot of people in history and political science. The majority of them were heading into law, which I did not. That was not my interest. But I think sociology at the time was not taken seriously as a department, but I took it seriously, and the thing about going to college there, I got there and I said, and I've told this to kids that I've counseled since then, I literally said, oh, this is what it's supposed to be like when you're in a classroom and there's somebody teaching who really cares about, the author or that. People generally, after freshman year, because there's always attrition, people generally are there after freshman year because they really want to be there. And I liked that. And it taught me how to study. And I went after working in the Virginia Department of Corrections in 1978. I went to the University of Pittsburgh to get my master's in social work. And that had been my goal, and I pretty much have been going ever since. But it just, it just was a very significant time for me in my life. I know there was another group that I wanted to mention. It was called the Women's Awareness Group. Now, one of the English professors kindly said to me later that you should not have something that spells out initials that are not good. And then he said that pointed out WAGs, which would have been an old term for a bunch of Women's Awareness Group. But even that was just like to get together, be supportive, be feminists, and that I remember seeing that being made fun of by both men and some of the people that come to mind were some first-year women, like, we don't need that, what's that? But feminism wasn't accepted everywhere anyway at that time.
Still isn't.
It still isn't, but it really wasn't. The term was that you would be bra burners or some such junk, A lot of the women in the first year had to, they were the ones that bathrooms had been converted over for them. I had heard through the grapevine that before coeducation, some people had not even, guys were showing up at class in their boxer shorts kind of thing and a t-shirt maybe, and it changed after that. So I was able to look at some of the political things going on, but that didn't really take off, but I think it might have started some kernels of change, and I always felt taken seriously in student government. I was taken seriously in my job. Some of the early entry-level classes, it was like, haha, let's see what the woman has to say for me or my fellow co-eds. But that lessened, I think, as we made it clear we weren't going anywhere, and we kept coming back.
Great. Can you say a little bit more about what you did after graduation, after your master's degree?
The first 4 years, I worked in a partial hospital, which is basically a psychiatric day treatment school for grade school children in Pittsburgh. And they went to school there, and they had psychiatric care there, but they went home at 4 o'clock and came back the next day. And that was an extended year program for 11 months of the year. And I worked with all of the families. And I went around Pittsburgh in all sorts of locations. Between working in the correctional center and doing a lot of home visits in low-income areas, I have been both dewormed and deloused on more than one occasion, and exposed to various things. But as I lasted, and after my master's degree, I worked myself into mental health facilities, which are great because they're clean and you have benefits and a clean bathroom and stuff like that. That's the truth. But always working with, primarily at that time, families and kids. When I was pregnant, my husband got transferred to the recession. It hit Pittsburgh, and he had been picked up by Electronic Data Systems, which was Ross Perot, remember him, his old company. and we got sent to Texas, where I had, for the next 3 years, I had 2 babies, and I did a lot of volunteer counseling, new mothers kind of thing. And then we got sent to New Jersey, and we did continued in my field there. But when New Jersey, I have to stop and think. New Jersey, we went to Cleveland. We wanted to return to Pittsburgh, but there were no positions. And EDS gave you a choice of states on a list you could pick from. And I remembered that they had really good education in Ohio at that time. And I said, okay, if we can't go to Pennsylvania, what about Ohio? And we are west of Cleveland, though it's still considered the Cleveland metropolitan area. And I have 2 very intelligent children who I did say that because I ended up working into counseling with the gifted as a subspecialty. And I also now, my other areas are, I work with a lot of high-functioning autistic kids. I work with a lot of anxiety and depression. And of course now, it's just helping people deal with the whole entire economic mess. But I was able to, through our school system, I did a lot of work. I did political campaigns that involved our school system. We have a very weird funding system in Ohio where school districts are funded by their tax levy. So people want to vote down a tax levy, then your school district loses money. To me, it's like running a school district by having a bake sale. It makes no sense. But I had done a lot of work with the clubs, the academic clubs in our school district in Ohio. My son had gone to the National Spelling Bee, so I had run the spelling bee for a couple years after that in our town. But he is now teaching overseas, and my daughter is in graduate school at George Mason. They've both been overseas. They're both good public speakers. My husband and I are great. So you see, Randolph-Macon, if I had not done that, that is one of those moments in life I would literally not be where I am right now. I would not have these 2 fantastic grown-up kids. I might have still been a secretary for the government, approaching retirement now. And, I mean, you want to talk about life-changing. It was a real turning point for me. And underneath all this discussion of what did coeducation mean, it was kind of fun. It was kind of fun, and you felt like a groundbreaker, and I always liked that. And it didn't bother me to be one of only 1 or 2 women in the room, and I think that probably prepared me later for life. And now, I mean, I might be in a position of counseling a male or having to understand male-female viewpoints in marriage counseling, So it's again, literally, it was a very pivotal moment in my life.
How have you stayed in contact with the college since graduation?
I would probably say not enough, as in not like now. Remember, this is before the internet. This is before Facebook, okay? As I say to people jokingly in my office, this was before cable. Literally. They asked me to come back at the 20th anniversary of maybe coeducation. I want to say 20. Might have been 96. It was my 20th anniversary. I went to that. That was what it was. It was my 20th reunion that I went to, and I was honored on the football field at halftime at homecoming, and B.J. Seymour was there, and that was the last time I saw her alive, and that was fun. I have sent in alumni news bits. I went to an alumni gathering that was called in Pittsburgh when we lived in that vicinity from Bill Downer, who was a graduate of 75. He'd pulled some people together. I went to my husband's 35th reunion last October. That was fun. They put me in the picture of that class, you know, with the person in the bee costume, because
Works in our office.
they said that I was really an honorary member of that class because I'd had so much to do with them. And I, you know, of course, I knew everybody pretty much who was there. That type of thing, you know, I think I would, if there were people there now entering social services or something of that vein, I would be more than happy to speak with them about, you know, especially co-eds, about what that means. And, you know, I shouldn't discriminate, excuse me, males too. Not as you are now. I'll bet that immediately upon leaving, there was like an alumni Facebook group of your class. That kind of stuff is available, and it wasn't then. We actually had to write. No.
One of the questions we end with, and it's sort of, you mentioned that you talk to kids who are interested in going into the social services. Is there any piece of advice or what words of advice essentially would you tell a young woman who's a student at Randolph-Macon now? If you could just give her a thought, especially with your perspective.
Well, being a counselor, I would say not to get caught up in the drama of the dorm, because it is very small in comparison to the big thing that you're doing, which is educating yourself, forming ways of obtaining knowledge. That sounds weird, but you really do. I do believe this firmly, that people with a college education continue through life trying to understand a topic, reading about it, that type of thing. I would advise to rise above some of the drama, the petty stuff. Who left this out? You make too much noise. And if you need to go out and find a quiet place on campus there to truly focus and pay attention to what you're learning at that moment, and not just get it done because it's due the next day. Because, you know, I mean, the facts of the world have grown by leaps and bounds since I was there. But I now, even with new technology, the way to approach a topic and take it apart and understand it started for me there. And that's very important, to take that way of lifelong learning with you. That's why you're there, not to get all hung up on who talked to your boyfriend last Friday and they really shouldn't, and who said something or other on Facebook, because that's not the big picture. And I think I still have the big picture, and I'm grateful for that.
All right. Well, thanks for your time. And
Okay.
Do you have anything else that you would like to say that you might have missed, or that you really want to be, you know, on record?
I think I've said it.
Thanks.